like Judaizers, or it doesn't have to be Judaizers in this day's age, but they're often think that they're more in line with Christ when they add to the gospel. Like, oh, I'm not just doing this, I'm doing this too. I'm circumcised, I'm doing ceremonies, I'm doing this. In reality, it's actually more. It's separating them more from Christ. Not that you can ever more be separated from Christ. But it's interesting that those would believe that in adding to the gospel, when you're not supposed to add to the gospel, they would believe it's bringing them closer to Christ, when actually it's utterly separating from him, because Christ is and will always be the only gospel of Christ, the only way to salvation, nothing more, nothing you can add to that plus Christ. So I think in today's age, again, that still happens. I think the example that's very close to me is Mormonism. That's a church that is growing and growing today. And I had a conversation with a couple of Mormons a few weeks ago, and it's a lot, although with the Judaizers case, it may have been more like obvious, and in the same way with Mormons in some way, but there are a lot of similarities between what we believe and what they believe. But the key things that we disagree on is the doctrine of salvation, which is what is the biggest, like, that's the disagreement that separates us. And they believe that, similar to the Judaizers, is that there are things that you add to Christ. So they add, they have this like salvation, like they believe Jesus only saves the physical body, and that the spiritual body still needs more. That it needs, they have to do certain things in order. I was listening to them explain this to me, and before that I was like nodding my head like, oh yeah, I agree, and then they said that and I was like, oh, okay, which is, this passage rung true into my, reminded me of that when they said that. I was like, oh, they're adding to the gospel. They're even cheapening the sacrifice of Christ by saying that it was only like a half sacrifice, and then the rest has to be paid for in a different way. So they believe in like the lordship of Christ, but at the same time that he's a kind of a failure, at fault for not finishing his work fully saving. So that's something that happens now. I mean, that church